"You will apologize to my wife," said the Duke of Dunscar from the doorway in a voice so quiet that the whole crowded room heard it, "before you leave this house on your own feet." No one had seen him come in. That was the thing they would speak of after, how a man of his size in his black evening dress had appeared in the arch of the Ravensworth ballroom without a footman's announcement, without a sound, as though the house had simply produced him at the moment he was most needed. He was not looking at the 200 guests who had turned to stare. He was looking at one man, Sir Marcus Cole, who stood over the Duke's wife with his hand still raised, and his mouth still open on whatever cruelty he had been in the middle of. Roderick Vane, Duke of Dunscar, had been late to his own hostess's ball because a foaling mare had wanted him at the stables, and he had come in through the garden door meaning to find Isolde and slip away with her early. He had crossed the length of the terrace and stepped into the light in time to see it. His wife, standing alone against a pillar in her blue gown, and Cole leaning close to her, and the flush of shame on her face, and then the small, ugly gesture, a hand raised, a glove struck across her cheek, hard enough to turn her head in front of the assembled county. He did not remember crossing the floor. One instant he was in the arch, the next he was between them, and Cole had taken a step back, and the raised hand had come down. "Dunscar," Cole said, recovering, mustering a laugh for the crowd. "I did not know she was, that is, the woman was impertinent. She stepped where she oughtn't and gave me insolence when I corrected her. I took her for one of the paid companions, some poor relation come to gawk. How was I to know?" "How were you to know?" Roderick repeated. He did not raise his voice. He had learned in 39 years that a man who never shouts is far more frightening than one who does. "You struck a woman across the face, Cole, in a room full of witnesses, and your defense is that you believed her poor, that you believed there was no man behind her worth the fearing." He turned then at last to Isolde. She was standing very straight, one hand pressed to the cheek that still bore the pale mark of the glove, and her eyes when they met his were bright with tears she would not shed in front of these people. He had known her 4 years. He had married her against the advice of every relation he possessed. A physician's daughter, portionless, too clever by half, no ornament to a ducal name, and he had never once regretted it. And he had never loved her so fiercely as he did in that instant, watching her refuse to weep before a room that would have enjoyed her weeping. "Are you hurt?" he asked her, only her, as though the two of them were alone. "No," she said, her voice shook. "No, Roderick, only my pride, and that will keep." "It will not have to." He took her hand from her cheek, gently, and looked at the mark, and something moved behind his eyes that made the nearest onlookers step back. Then he tucked her hand into the crook of his arm and turned and addressed the room. He did not have to raise his voice for that, either. The room had gone silent enough to hear a candle gutter. "This," said the Duke of Dunscar, "is my wife, Her Grace the Duchess of Dunscar. Some of you have wondered why you have not been introduced to her these 4 years. You assumed, I imagine, that I kept her in the country because I was ashamed of where she came from." A pause. "I kept her in the country because I did not think this world deserved her. I see now that I was right." A murmur ran through the crowd. Isolde's fingers tightened on his sleeve. "Sir Marcus Cole has just struck her," Roderick went on, "on the grounds that he took her for a woman of no consequence. I will let you all consider what that tells you about Sir Marcus Cole, that his courtesy to a lady depends entirely upon the size of her husband's estate. There are gentlemen in this room. He is not among them, and he will not be received in any house I frequent, nor any house whose owner wishes to go on frequenting mine from this night forward." He let that land. He knew precisely how much his word was worth in that county, and so did every person present, and so, going grey now, did Sir Marcus Cole. Isolde had known, when she married him, that she was marrying a man the world found terrible. What the world did not know, what she had learned slowly, in 4 years of quiet country evenings, was that the terror he inspired was a kind of armor he had forged in grief and never learned to set down. His first betrothed had died of a fall from a horse he had bred and given her. His mother had wasted away that same winter. He had come into his title alone at 30 and shut the door on the world's pity, and the world, mistaking the shut door for coldness, had learned to be afraid. She had opened that door one argument at a time, and she thought now, watching him address the silent ballroom, that these 200 people were seeing for the first time what she had lived inside for 4 years. Not a cold man, but a man of enormous, banked, controlled feeling, terrible only to those who threatened what he loved. For a moment in the hush after his words, no one moved at all. The great room, gold-lit and glittering, held its breath. The hostess, Lady Ravensworth, was the first to break it. She came forward from among her guests, took Isolde's free hand in both of hers, and said clearly, "Your Grace, you must forgive us. We did not know you, and we should have wished to. You are most welcome in my house. Sir Marcus is not." And she turned her back on Cole with a deliberate rustle of silk, and one by one, like a tide going out, the rest of the county followed her lead. Roderick felt Isolde's hand tremble once against his arm and then go still. He looked down at her. There was color coming back into her face now, and something in her expression he had not seen there before, not merely relief, but a kind of wonder, as though the ground she had believed she stood on alone had turned out, all along, to hold. "Now," Roderick said, "you will apologize to her Grace, not to me, to her. And you will do it as though your standing in this county depended upon it, because it does." Cole's face worked. For a moment it seemed he might bluster, might try to laugh it off once more, but he looked round the room and found what Roderick had already found there, that not one face was with him, that the hostess herself had turned her shoulder, that the men who had drunk his wine an hour ago now studied the floor. He was a coward, and cowards can read a room. He turned to Isolde and bowed, low and stiff. "Your Grace," he said through his teeth, "I ask your pardon. I spoke and acted unforgivably." "You did," Isolde agreed. Her voice had steadied. "I shall not pretend to forgive what was unforgivable, sir, but I will say this so that everyone hears it. You struck me because you believed I was no one. Remember, the next time you raise your hand to a woman, that you can never be certain who is watching from the door. Most of them have no duke. That does not make them any less worth the fearing." It was, the county agreed for years after, the finest set-down anyone had ever delivered from beneath a fresh bruise. Cole left within the quarter hour. He left the county within the month. He was not, so far as anyone troubled to learn, much missed. Roderick took his wife home. He did not speak on the drive. He held her hand in both of his and looked at the mark on her cheek by the swinging lamplight of the carriage, and she watched the fury in him bank slowly down into something quieter and harder to bear. When at last they were home, and the servants dismissed, and the fire built up in her rooms, he knelt before her chair like a much younger man and pressed his lips very gently to the bruised cheek. "I should have brought you to town years ago," he said. "I told myself I kept you here to protect you. The truth is I feared they would see what I saw, and I did not wish to share you. It was selfish, and tonight you paid for my selfishness." "You did not strike me, Roderick," she said, threading her fingers into his dark hair. "A frightened little man did. You crossed a ballroom to stand between me and him. Do not take his sin onto your own account. I will not allow it." "4 years," he said low, "and I have never told you plainly. I let you believe, I think, that ours was a sensible match, that I chose you for your wit and your steadiness, and the peace you brought to my house, all of which is true, and none of which is the reason." He lifted his head. "I married you because the first time you argued with me over a tenant's rent, do you recall, you told me to my face that I was wrong, and I felt something wake in me that had been asleep since before my father died. You made me a living man again, Isolde. Everything I have, everything I am, I would set between you and the world and count it cheap. I only wish I had said so long before some fool made me say it in a rage." Isolde had not wept in front of the ballroom. She wept now a little, but they were not unhappy tears, and he gathered her up out of the chair and held her, and neither of them said anything for a long while, and none of it needed saying. He did bring her to town after that, often, and openly at his side, so that all the world might grow used to the sight of the Duchess of Dunscar on the Duke's arm. And a curious thing happened, as it does when a powerful man makes plain that he honors his wife. The county, which had been prepared to whisper about the physician's daughter, decided instead that it had always known her to be a woman of remarkable quality. Doors that had never opened to her stood open now. She walked through them without hurry, on her own terms, and she never once forgot what it had felt like to stand alone against a pillar and be struck for being no one. And so she made a point, all her life, of noticing the women no one noticed, the poor relations and the paid companions come to gawk, and of speaking to them kindly, and of watching who was watching from the doors. Some years later, a young bride, newly and unhappily married into a great family, asked the Duchess how she had borne it, the cruelty of those first seasons, the contempt of people who thought her beneath them. "I did not bear it alone," Isolde said. "That is the whole of the secret, and I am sorry to say it is not one you can simply decide upon. But I will tell you what my husband told me on the worst night of my life, and it has served me since." She smiled, and across the room her husband, gray now at the temples and slower on the stairs and every bit as devoted, looked up as though he had felt himself spoken of. "He told me that a woman's worth is never set by the man who strikes her, but by the man who stands between, and that if you cannot find such a man, then be, yourself, the one who stands in the doorway. It is the better half of the bargain in the end. It is the half that costs you nothing but courage and buys another soul the world."